Everybody. Welcome to our next session here. So we're all going to talk about today about ways to access fascinating books. So I have to tell you first about a group of boys I learned about who lived on a little island in Thailand, a floating village, and they were obsessed with football. They loved to watch football, but they had no place to play or to practice. Initially, they didn't have any of the essentials it took to play the sport, and to even be before a football team, never mind practice. But they didn't let that stop them. In a second, I'm going to show you a video clip of these boys. And you might be thinking to yourselves, hey, I've heard of these guys before. Maybe you learned about them before. Maybe you haven't. But when you watch this clip, I want you to pay attention to how they did whatever it took to get the essential they needed to play in order to make a team and to be awesome at football. So I'm going to go ahead and start this clip here. We're going to play for the first minute, about 2 minutes. As you're doing, again, pay attention to what it took to get awesome at this. Mm. So you can see these boys, sorry, still learning this technology thing. So you can see that these boys really wanted to get good at soccer. But the thing was, they had all of these villagers telling them how impossible it was. You don't have the essentials. Look at where you live. You live on a floating island. And I just want to show you where they ended up after a bunch of practice and a commitment to do whatever it took to get strong at their goal and to have the tools that they needed. So you can see these boys wanted to get awesome, and they knew they were going to have to do whatever it took to get the essentials they needed. And we're going to finish this video now. Again, keeping in mind, we're going to see what these boys were ending up doing, keeping strong at their goal and working hard at it. Okay, so just like the boys wanted to get awesome there, we saw a lot of the steps that they took to get awesome. They played into adulthood and were regarded as one of Thailand's or South Thailand's best football clubs. So we're in the business together of becoming awesome at reading. And I think there's some things we can learn from this football club to transport or translate into our reading lives. We know that there are essentials that we're going to need in order to get really good at reading, just as we would sports. We also know that we need time to practice, but we also need access to fascinating text. So just like the boys wanted to get awesome at football and did whatever it takes to get the supplies they would need, I want to teach you today that I want to teach you today that readers work to get awesome supplies to make themselves better at reading. They don't just think about the books that they want to read, they find creative ways to get these books, doing pretty much anything possible so they can read books and they can find personally meaningful and fascinating. So I want you guys to think alongside of me and ask this question. What are some creative ways to access books? And when I say creative, I mean creative. We know probably some of the obvious answers: go to the library, if you have books at home, but we're going to kind of think outside the box for this because in a time like this, we need to think outside the box. So if I ask myself, okay, what are some creative ways I can access books? Well, there's lots of different ways. So if you are going to school and seeing classmates regularly, if social distance has passed, you're able to host a car wash or a bake sale to raise money for books. So you can kind of raise money to earn those books that way. Maybe you host a dance-a-thon, thinking about ways you can raise money to get a ton of books or even book walks. Some of you guys might be thinking, gosh, we can write wish lists and lay them out when the school hosts the annual book fair. You can swap books with your classmates, with your partners, as long as it's okay, social distance, everything. Swap the books. If they have a book you want to read, switch it there, write wish lists. You guys can always take trips to the library, and you can, if you have a Kindle or some kind of electronic book that way, you can always do that too. You can also do something called a book parade. Book parade's really fun, and you kind of just see what everybody's reading, and that way you can kind of browse the different options. Neighborhood book houses. I don't know if you guys have seen any of these, but there's a couple in my neighborhood, and at the end of some people's driveway, they have these little houses, and inside these little houses are little books, and it says, take a book, leave a book. So it's a way to get free books, basically. You bring a book to the library, to the little library, put a book in there, take a book out. So it's kind of a cute way to do that. Or you can use some kind of digital library app, and there is a lot of different apps you can use. We're going to explore those a little bit today as well. So, see what we're doing so far. We're thinking about super creative ways that we can do anything in our power to get fascinating texts that we're going to need to become awesome at reading. So I'm going to encourage you to think beyond the list. And also, we have to recognize that this is not a typical year, and we are going to continue to social distance. And we have to be even more creative and pivot to make sure that we have the text that we want access to. So some communities around the country and around the world are driving communities or biking communities have had a book parade where people fill up their vehicle or their basket and their bikes and they bring books around to safely exchange. Or maybe you're using a digital library app, like we've mentioned here on this previous slide. If you're not going to be able to safely move around your home and you have to stay sheltered in place, you might just want to take advantage of some of the resources the library has for you, whether it's electronic books to get, you can also register for a library card at home. So there's definitely things you can do if that's the option for you. When we think about virtual resources here, there's a lot that you guys have access to, and we're going to, again, touch on some of these today. So there's Pebble Go. Epic is a really popular one. That's one we're actually going to we're going to start to use, and hopefully you'll get comfortable with. There's Myon, there's Libby Overdrive, Capstone Library. You can also, this might sound really weird, but if you have a doctor's appointment or you are going somewhere where they have like those magazines, those books in the waiting room, you can always look at those, read those. If you're somebody who loves to cook, cookbooks are a really good option. You might have one stashed away in your kitchen somewhere, comic books, or even the mail. Sometimes there's some pretty interesting things in there to read, especially if you're really trying to find something to read. So as you plan your work today, just remember that like the boys that really wanted to get good at football, despite the fact that they lived on a floating island, and just like we want to get awesome at reading this year, despite the fact that we might not be together in the classrooms and we might be starting the school year in an unusual way, we need to be the kind of readers that find super creative ways and think together about how to get the books, doing pretty much anything possible so that we can find books that we find fascinating. So it's time to make a reading plan for yourself today. Okay, so I kind of mentioned a couple of things you can do on here. I'll kind of walk through with you guys. So the main thing I want to kind of focus on is what we have talked about today. So you want to begin to think of different ways you can access books. Think of this as like a plan for yourself. Okay, if I need books, what am I going to go to? What's going to help me out? And that's what you're going to kind of focus in on. When you kind of think about those different resources, and you can look at the resources mentioned here, or what we kind of talked about here to make a list, you're going to jot down some ideas on page 39 of your notebook. So something that you can basically look at anytime you need some kind of access to books. So you can mention any of those resources that I just talked about here. You can also mention our classroom library if you have books at home, you have books with friends, your public library, if there's a website you use, whatever it might be. There's a lot of different ways you can access books, and it's important for us to start thinking about that. Now, once you've jotted down some ideas, you want to read for 20 or 30 minutes today. Now, what you read does not matter as long as we are practicing getting into that habit of workshop time to reading time. So if you want to look at one of those online resources, I would highly recommend Epic. They have tons of books on there and they're super helpful. But we also have a virtual library on our class website. You can always look at books there. And again, just 20 or 30 minutes. So some things you guys might work on today is over here. So you might, if you're somebody who's been reading, you might want to create a volume goal for yourself. So how many pages do you want to read right now? You might want to read 30 pages now and 40 pages later, or you just want to read 20 pages now. It's whatever you want to do. So create some kind of work plan for yourself. So what are you going to work on today? You can always take this time to look into your library resources and get a digital library card. You can add books to your books to read list. So as you're kind of researching these different books using these online resources, is there anything that jumps out to you that you want to add to that list? Remember, that list is in your notebook. You can also try a digital library app. So I mentioned a couple here. So Sora, Hoopla, Libby, and Overdrive. Those might be some options too if you want to kind of explore those. Or you might just want to write a letter. If you know somebody that you can get books from, you might just want to write a letter to see what they come up with there. All right, so you guys have a lot of different options today, a lot of different resources you guys can use. And so what we're going to do is really kind of start building on these resource lists, especially in this crazy time of remote learning, hybrid learning, whatever you want to call it, whatever is happening right now. So take the time to figure out how you're going to access these books, start reading, and jot down your thinking.